This is going to be really laid back, and at points, it's going to feel like you're getting a drink of water from a fire hydrant, okay? So that is what that handout is for. You are not expected to walk out of here tonight and remember every bit of this, okay? These handouts are so that you can look back and remember the high points. And you know, when you start to do your personal Bible study at home, you look back at this handout and you go, okay, I'm in the Old Testament, I'm in the writings, and you go from there and you just get those high points, okay? Does that make sense, everyone? Yes? No? I'm not going to listen to you. You're not Asa. Y'all in? All right. All right. Well, listen, while they're passing those out, I just want to pray over our time together, and then we'll dive into this study, okay? Father, we come to you in the name of Jesus. Lord, I pray that you would bring fruit from this, Lord. Father, I pray that this be one of those moments that, you know, tonight we may leave and not even recognize as this big significant thing, but a year from now, Crossroads is seeing fruit. People are growing and knowing you more because they are studying and handling their word at home correctly and feeding themselves and growing as a community because of this. Lord, I pray that you use this to bear much fruit. We love you. We love you more than anything. Thank you for Jesus. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. So what is the first thing that we have to do as interpreters of Scripture? You might want to even ask the question, what is the first task of the interpreter? And that's called exegesis. Y'all heard exegesis before? Or, okay, a few of you. Exegesis is simply getting the text into its context. Okay? So what is context? Cricket. Y'all talk to me. What is context? Okay, the scenario, the situation it's happening in. That's about the best way to say. I don't really know the best way to define context because there's so many elements to context. However, I think we can do a short little exercise where maybe we won't be able to define context when we're done with this, but we'll all recognize context. So I want you to get close, just 2 or 3 people in your groups, okay? And I'm going to give you a statement, all right? And when I give you that statement, you need to develop a story based on the statement I give you. Y'all with me? All right, so get where you can see. You don't have to be right next to each other, whatever. Just get where you can talk in your groups. 3 or 4 is fine. Okay, so here is your statement, and your group needs to develop a short, I'm talking 5 to 10 sentence story. We're not looking for a Grisham novel, okay? But you need to develop a story on this sentence, okay? Your story needs to have this sentence in it. It has a virus, okay? Develop your story around that sentence. It has a virus. Go. So whose group has a story you think is pretty good? Okay, right here. Let's hear this group's story. All right, so you raised your hand. We'll nominate you as narrator. So,
all right. My computer crashed. I lost all my files. It has a virus, and my company's about to go under.
Okay, all right. That's a bad virus, man. All right. So I'm going to nominate Brother Ace's group because I heard some. I'm going to use your group because I heard things I wanted to hear over here. All right. So one of you guys tell us your story, or as far as you got with it.
Monkeys have viruses endangering human species. Medicine doesn't help the viruses, and viruses can live for days to weeks.
Okay, all right. So we have a monkey virus that's endangering the entire human race. We have a late 90s horror film. But anyway, so we're going with that. Something I heard over here that I want to point out in a minute before I forget is someone else came in and Asa said, we're making a story around it has a virus. And the first thing that was asked is, what has a virus? Let's just remember that was asked. Who else wants to share it? Right here, all right? Okay, so one of those alligator hunters was found. Sanderson's farm, okay. So They don't use all the hormones and stuff. They're not supposed to be mutated creatures there. So, all right. Okay, those are good. But what we all did is created context. When I tell you it has a virus, your natural first question is, what? Because it could be a monkey or it could be a computer. You follow what I'm saying? Now, some things about those stories are going to tell us when and a lot of other stuff. But what you just did is create context. It has a virus. That statement by itself doesn't have a whole lot of meaning. We don't know what it is. We don't know what the virus is. Electronic? Is it organic? That statement in and of itself, without more to it, doesn't really have meaning. We're going to have 3 sessions tonight. Our first session is about discovering the context of the text. Okay? What questions should we ask? When we sit down to read a book of the Bible, we need to ask, what question are we going to be answering? Your first blank at the top, we answered at the start, historical context, the situation surrounding a book's author and audience. If you don't get all the blanks filled in, if you miss one, it's okay. I have a completed copy up here, and during the breaks and after it, I'll let you look at it if you need to fill that in. So don't stress if you skip one. How many of you have been to Secret Church before? Okay, I want you to think Secret Church with a speaker who isn't nearly as good, okay? That's what we're trying to do here in this time we've got together. So the first one, we're looking at the situation. That's what you all just created, is the situation around a statement. And without that situation, you can't possibly correctly understand that statement. So when we look at the Bible, we're trying to ask, what is the situation around each one of these books? And there's a few things we need to look at every time in order to understand that. First thing we really want to ask, your first blank under historical context, is author. Who wrote the book? That matters a lot. If I told you that we've got a statement, it has a virus, finding out who the author was is going to tell you a whole lot about that virus. If I told you that a medical doctor wrote that statement, that gives you a clue as to what kind of virus it is, right? It doesn't give you all the context, but it gives you clues into the situation. Does that make sense, y'all? If I told you that an electrical engineer wrote that statement, we're looking at a whole, you follow how your mind immediately, so knowing who the author is automatically gives us some idea about context. Now, when you talk about the Bible, is it a Gentile author? Is it a Jewish author? Old Testament, New Testament. What is the situation they lived in? What had they been through? What point of life are they in? Knowing that author is going to matter a whole lot. We don't always know the author. There are a few books that, to quote one church father, only God knows who wrote those books, okay? But we can still discern a lot about context. Sometimes knowing the author is almost all the context you've got other than audience. When you read the Corinthian letters, it's like listening to one side of a phone call and you don't even have everything that side said. There's 2 more letters to the Corinthians talked about in 1st and 2nd Corinthians that we don't have. And we have none of the correspondence coming back to Paul. You follow what I'm saying? So you've got one side of a phone call and you're missing every other sentence in it. So knowing Paul, that gives us a lot of background. We know something about our audience there that helps us out a lot. But you with me there? So knowing this author, that's huge. Audience, the recipient of the book. Recipient's going to matter a lot. Where we are, who we are, matters. When I was first hired with Fuge Camps, they sent me to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to work my first summer of Fuge. Y'all, my accent's cleaned up from what it was, and my accent's still bad, okay? I am from North Mississippi. Y'all know that Mississippi is really 2 states. You have North Mississippi and South Mississippi. There's 4 S's in the south part, 2 in the north part. Mississippi versus Mississippi, okay? So that's the difference. But when I moved to Philadelphia, they couldn't understand a thing I said, y'all. I remember I said something about my parents' dog being runt in a sermon one night. Everybody from north of Virginia was like, did you just cuss in a foreign language? What deep theological term did you use? They had no idea what I just said when I said runt, okay? When they came up to me the first day and asked me if I wanted wood or ice, what are you talking about, wood or ice? And they said, no, water ice. That's what they called a snow cone. Even if I had understood what they said, that was their terms. Rent was a southern term. Where we are, our audience, that matters. You look at the letters to the 7 churches in Revelation. If you don't know a lot about that area and who that audience is, you don't understand a lot of things they said. When Jesus talks about having a sword, and one of those, I believe it was Smyrna, the city had the right of the sword. And Jesus says, no, I'm the one with the real right of the sword. And Laodicea, talking about water. If you don't know that in Laodicea we don't have any wells, and they had to pipe their water in from hot springs and cold springs. And you have to know that audience and how they would have understood things, okay? Make sense? Again, sometimes we don't know the audience. 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. We gain what we know about the audience from what the letter tells us. We're not certain as to the audience with those books, okay? But we can gain a lot from things like that. When we do know the audience, that highly influences what we're seeing. So now we've got a sender and a recipient in this text that we can think of, okay, what did they mean then? The first goal of studying your Bible is exegesis, getting the text in its context. The first rule, and this is not on your handout, but the first rule is a text cannot mean what it never meant before. Now, it can be applied in lots of ways. When we start asking that question, but what does it mean to you? We got to be careful with that, because it means what it means, but how does it apply to you? Now, that can, the rubber can meet the road a lot of ways. We can talk about modesty, and maybe this person over here needs to be more modest how they do with their money, and this person over here needs to be more modest in the way they dress. So you see the same principle from text, but can be applied to our lives in different ways. Is that making sense? But the text can't mean what it never meant before. So we're trying to get this original meaning. Author and audience are our 2 big keys. Our next big key, this is your third blank. So your first blank's author, your second is audience, your third is date. Date matters because, 2 examples. If I said the war right now, if I referenced what am I probably talking about? Okay, Desert Storm or Afghanistan. If I had said the war in 1948, I'm talking about World War II. You see how the meaning of the same thing changed based on when we're talking? That means a lot. Second one, we just used that word virus. Okay, back to that. If I had told you it has a virus in 1985, and then began to talk about my coffee maker at home and how it has a virus and won't make coffee at the programmed time. Then I can program it from online, but something's happened and it won't listen to the commands I send, and the coffee maker has gotten a virus. If I said that to you in 1985, you'd have me in a padded room before the end of the day. You with me? I say that now and it makes sense, okay? I don't have it now, but I used to have a coffee maker that, connected to the Wi-Fi. And so I could tell it when, I had a little app and everything. It was really, really cool if it had not been a piece of junk and lasted more than 6 months. But anyway, that was legit that my coffee maker could get a virus. That makes sense in 2012. In 1985, you're nuts if you think a household appliance has a virus. See how words change on date? We need to ask, and those 2 blanks out there are for you to write how date is important in your own words. There's not just a specific thing you write out there. You put it in your own words there, okay, so that you know how you're answering that one, because date's a hard one just to give you blanks to fill in. Date is a huge part of context. Words change based on that audience's place, based on the audience itself, based on the author, based on the time. Now, I'm not telling you that there's relative truth. There's always absolute truth, but words mean different things in different times and places. Everybody with me? Good stuff. Now, again, this is not one of those super interesting sermons, okay? This is academic, so I love you guys for letting me do it. All right, let's keep going. Purpose and occasion. People get purpose and occasion backwards a lot. These are, for whatever reason, they are the hardest to really get our mind around. When you think about purpose, that is the author's goal in writing the book. In other words, he wants to see this effect, and he wants the book to be the cause. Okay? So you're blank there, purpose. The author's goal in writing the book. When you read Mark, The first thing Mark says is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He doesn't use the word Christ again until chapter 8. But he spends the first 8 chapters getting evidence. He's showing you that Jesus is in control of the spiritual realm. He is in control of the physical realm. He's in control of the weather. He's in control of disease. He's showing you that John the Baptist is the forerunner, the fulfillment of the second coming of Elijah. He's showing you all these things to set up that Jesus is the Christ before he says he's the Christ. But the very first thing he told you was, I'm going to announce that Jesus is the Christ. Y'all follow me? His purpose is to convince you that the Christ has come and he is Jesus. So with that purpose in mind, everything you read in those first few chapters is working toward that goal. And when we start trying to make them work toward another goal, we're not letting them mean what Mark meant. Follow me? Okay? So Jesus is the Christ. That's his goal. That's our purpose. What's the author's goal? And sometimes he tells you right out, sometimes he doesn't. But there you go, the goal. The occasion. What is the situation that caused a need for the letter or the book? Mark is, most guys, and watch Asa be one of the Matthew guys here, most guys say Mark wrote first, okay? Do you know anybody that calls Matthew? I don't know any. There are some scholars out there who think Matthew. I do know one that says Luke wrote first. Do you know who that is? Yes. Well, no, not the mutual friend in Georgia. Mutual friend from seminary. Teaches German. Anyway, so, sorry, y'all. Chasing rabbits here. Anyway, Mark probably wrote first. Why did Mark have to write this down? And why does he wait to the 60s? Well, there was this idea that Jesus is coming back any minute. And they didn't think they were going to need to write this stuff down. And then all of a sudden they look up and, hey, the last 2 eyewitnesses are left and looks like they're probably going to get executed. We should write down what they've been saying so that we don't mar it later. So the occasion was, I need to write down the eyewitness testimony, you know. And so he starts writing it down, and the need to spread the gospel for your everyday common church goer to be able to take this to someone who's not and show them, look, you know, this is what they're teaching, to spread the gospel because the eyewitnesses were dying out. And the purpose then was to convince people that Jesus is the Christ. Do you see the difference in purpose and occasion? Occasion is what caused a need for the book or letter. Purpose is the goal of the author. Corinthians, the immorality going on in the Corinthian church, the theological attacks that they're under, that's your occasion. The purpose is to fix that stuff. You see that? Okay. All right, so that is our historical context. There's one more that I don't have a blank for, but I always want to describe, and that's geological and geographical context. Laodicea, again, is a good example of that. If you know that Laodicea is in the Lycus Valley, and you know it was rich, and you can know that they had a center ophthalmological center where they made eye salve, and that they made black tapestries and black fabric that was really fine. That helps you understand the passages about where Jesus says, you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. Even though you say, I am rich, I've prospered, and I need nothing, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire so that you may be rich, and salve so that you may see, and white garments so that the shame of your nakedness may not be seen. All that makes sense when you know all that historical, you know, but the geography and geology is the only thing that's going to help you understand that hot, cold, and lukewarm. That's the passage where Jesus says, you're neither hot nor cold. I would that you were hot or cold. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will vomit you out of my mouth. If you don't know that the hot water and cold water are being piped in and that they're useful for all kinds of stuff, but lukewarm water was good for nothing. And if you drank lukewarm water, it'd make you sick. Okay? My dad always said, make you holler Huey and Earl. You know, Huey, Earl. Okay? You couldn't use it for medicinal purposes. You couldn't cook with it. You could do nothing with lukewarm water. I mean, it was about all it was good for was watering your plants. Okay? What he's telling them is hot's useful and cold's useful. He's not saying be hot on fire for Jesus or cold off in the world, but don't straddle the fence. Once you know that geology of piping in that water and where they were located geographically, then you start to understand how that would have meant to their audience in that time. All of that comes together there in Laodicea. Your author writing to the Laodicean audience in the 1st century AD in a place where water had to be piped. You see how all that stuff matters to make that context to make sense? Yes, no, I'm not listening. You're boring me to death. Y'all. Great, I got like 4 heads that shook. So everybody else, we'll wake them up in a minute. Okay, yeah, so good. All right, that is the gist of historical context. There is more specific historical context, okay? But that's the gist. That's the questions you need to be asking. Now, right now, you may be asking this question. Where in the world am I supposed to find that stuff out? That's our last session. Our last session, we're going to come in laid back. We're going to look at the tools we use to find this information, okay? Okay? So, but these are the questions we need to be asking, at least those. There are more, but those are keys that when you start turning them, the Scripture starts making sense. The context is in place once you do that, okay? So the second type of context we have to get, that's your historical, real-life setting. The second is literary context. Now, that's B on here. Am I asking the right questions? Literary context. Literary or genre. What kind of literature a book is. Much like a music genre. Do you know that they still have record stores? FYE, I think. Yeah, FYE. You know what I'm talking about? And they actually do sell music in those stores. And if you've ever walked into a store like that before, how do you find the music you're looking for? Alphabetized by author. But even inside of alphabetized by artist, how else go bigger than that? How is what type? By genre, you know. So we walk in and we go over to the old school country section where I'm sure we find Brother Asa and Russell Moore standing over there. But anyway, and they are looking through that, and they're going to look alphabetized within that genre, the type of music it is, okay? If you are trying to find a Hank Williams album, you don't walk to the hip-hop section. We know that. We know genre. We get that, especially with music. But it also works that way in literature. The type of book you are reading is so important for you to understand. You say, well, what do you mean? A book's a book. No, a math book is not used the same way a novel is used. Those are different genres of literature. Okay? If you want to get the point of a novel, what do you have to read? The whole thing. If you want to know how to factor, do you read the whole math book? You read the section on factoring. You got me? We use the books differently. We approach them differently. You don't read a poem the same way you read a historical document. Okay? Poems don't mean what they mean literally. We'll talk about that more in a minute, okay? Roses might be red and violets may be blue. Sugar is sweet, but you're not literally sweet. You got me? We'll talk about that more in a little bit. So, what kind of literature are we reading? That's what we're asking. So we're going to look now in each of the genres of the Bible. Now we'll probably take a short break here in just a minute. But we're going to go ahead and dive into at least the New Testament genres. And then we may take a short break, come back to the Old Testament ones, and move on to our second 2 sessions. Okay? These will get, I hope, you may not have picked up on this yet. This is the really heavy academic part. And it's going to get less academic and more practical with a little bit of spiritual there in the middle as we move on, okay? So, let's go. Any questions so far before we start diving into these genres? Okay, let's dive into these genres. First genre of the New Testament is gospel. Gospel literature. Gospels are announcements. That's your next blank. Not biographies. One of the most common mistakes made when people read a gospel is that they think they are reading the story of the whole life of Jesus. In Mark, I think is it 11 or 13? Don't take me to gospel on this, but sorry, I'm punny. I love cheesy jokes. Lactose intolerant people need to leave. You will get sick from my jokes. Okay, I love cheesy stuff. Anyway, this, see, I just made another one. Mark only gives you like 11 to 13 days of Jesus' life. That's not a biography, folks. So what are they? If they're not biographies, what are they? They are announcements. That is what the word gospel means. I should have set up a whiteboard. I didn't think to do that. But if you look at the Greek word for gospel, it's euangelion. Now that sounds really weird to you. But when I write it on a board and then transpose it into English word for word, what you see is evangelion. I change 2 letters at the end and you see evangelism. That's where we get our word. What is evangelism? Spreading the good news. Announcing the good news. Making it known. That's what the Gospels are. They are announcements of the good news. Quite simply. Number 1, let's look at what these were. Okay, so the first, number 1 under Gospels. Romans used Gospels to announce victory in war, or, and this one's stated a few different ways. It's it would be the same thing to them, but they would announce a royal birth or a succession to a new emperor. Okay, so the emperor's son, that type of thing. So their announcement of a victory in war or a royal birth. Number 2. I'm sorry, I just gave you Romans. I don't have the blank on here. Some do debate this. But there is also the idea that the Hebrews used euangelions, gospels, that they considered that an announcement of Yahweh moving to save his people. Okay? But that is a little bit debated. So just know that either way, what better genre for the announcement of Christ? An announcement of a victory in war, an announcement of the new emperor has come, or the ruler has come, an announcement of royal birth, even though Mark doesn't even tell us about the birth. Y'all following that? That's what they are. They are an announcement, okay? And a movement of Yahweh to save his people. That fits very well too, okay? So number 2 on here, gospel in Greek is euangelion. Don't worry about how to spell it correctly. Spell it so that when you read it next time, you say it correctly. Okay? So, it starts with an E, though. I'll tell you that much. Euangelion. However you want to spell that. I want you to be able to say that later to tell somebody else. Okay? And if you're just like OCD and have to have it, it's Euangelion. Euangelion. Ian, okay? Don't worry about that. You can come up and look at it later. We get our word evangelism from it. That's number 2 blank. I didn't tell you to fill those in when we went over. Number 3, there are 3 synoptic gospels. So your blank on number 3 is synoptic. synoptic. What does synoptic mean? Same viewpoint. Look at the 2 parts of the word. Sin is in synchronized, or same, and then optic, as in looking at, optical. They are looking at the same things. Does that make sense? 3 of the Gospels tell almost the same stories, and they follow the same storyline. And those are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The Synoptic Gospels, probably Mark wrote first, then Matthew and Luke are looking at Mark and adding things that Mark may not have known that they do know. Luke tells us things like Mary hid these things in her heart. How does Luke know that? You say the Holy Spirit. And I get what you're saying when you say that, but how does he know that Mary had these thoughts and ideas that she cherished in her heart? He knew Mary. You follow what I'm saying? He talked to Mary about this. Maybe Mark didn't, or maybe Mark, such a Jewish background that he didn't think to talk to the lady. Luke, coming from this Gentile background, oh yeah, I want to know what she says. So there's your author playing into that and all that stuff. But they're writing down these same stories, maybe adding a little bit or taking away, and they're molding it to their audience. Matthew's audience is really Hebrew. Mark's is mixed. Luke is probably really Gentile. And they take on these characteristics. For instance, when Jesus dies on the cross, the centurion looks at Jesus and says, surely this man was... Y'all fill it in. According to Matthew, he says the Son of God. What does Luke have him say? He says, surely this was a righteous man. So is Luke arguing with Matthew? Is the Bible contradicting itself? No. And there weren't two statements made. They're probably, the centurion probably even said that in Latin, and Luke and Matthew are writing in Greek, maybe even originally in Hebrew and translated into Greek. So they're getting an idea across languages and cultures. Think about it. If Luke's writing to a Gentile audience who's been raised to see the Roman pantheon, and he tells them that Jesus is the Son of God, what do they think? They think Hercules. He's a demigod. If Luke says that, they totally miss who Jesus is. But Plato said, what about a righteous man? If a truly righteous man ever come, they would impale him. If the man really is righteous, if the man really is perfect, he's even better than Zeus or Jupiter in that context. What do you mean? Jupiter, Zeus, they're not perfect. They have some big indiscretions. This truly righteous man, he's even better than they were. Luke is communicating the truth about Jesus. Matthew's just saying it in a way we're more familiar with. They're both telling us he's the Son of God, and when you read their whole books, they're not just telling us that he's the offspring of God, they're telling us he's God come in the flesh, which John explicitly states. And the Word became flesh. The Word was God. The Word was with God and was God. And then later on in the same passage, Word became flesh. You see that? So they're saying this to their audience. So when you start reading these, horizontally, all three, and you see these little changes, why? Usually it's going to have a Gentile, Jewish reason why those little changes are there. That's the other thing with the Gospels being announcements. They are not chronological stories. These guys put in, and that's not a blank, but it is something you probably want to write. These guys put in these transitions of immediately and that type stuff. You got to read this like a first century person. We're reading it like we've been taught to read a history today. These are the inerrant, inspired, Holy Spirit put down words, but they're written in a first century type of literature. Okay? So these are transitions and connectors that they put in there. Don't try to draw a map of these crazy, Jesus went here and in here and in here, and oh, that doesn't make any sense. That's because he wasn't trying to make the point of where Jesus went. He was making the point that Jesus is the Christ. Y'all with me? Let them announce what they announce. Don't try to make them say something he's not trying to tell you. I know that's, when I teach that in my New Testament class, and I teach our BSU director, Matt, used to be there. Matt can tell you that the BSU I work at, which is BCM here, it's not a BSU, it's a fundamentalist recovery center. And so when I start telling them that type stuff, we're blowing minds, okay? I know that's hard to get. I didn't understand that growing up. But once you get your mind around that, that's going to help you understand the Gospels. When you start going, okay, I see the point he's making, and you quit trying to turn him into a 21st century historian who's tracing the steps of the battle, and you let him be a first century Christian theologian who's telling you this is real history that really happened, and these stories happen like he's saying, but he's not trying to put these stories in this happened, then this happened, then this happened. He's trying to get you to see this happened, and that shows us Jesus controlled the weather. Then this happened with this demon, and that shows us that he controlled the spiritual realm. And then this happened when he healed a man with a disease, and that shows us that he controls this realm. And what he's trying to get you to see, if he controls all that, he's God. He's the Christ. You follow me? The church fathers said of Mark, Mark did a great job of telling us what Jesus did, but he took no care to put it in a chronological order. His order is theological, not chronological. They're meant to communicate the truth about Jesus, not just an order of events. Now, when you get to the Passion Week, they become chronological. They start going, this happened, this happened, this happened. But for the most part, they are announcing that Christ has come. Okay? So Gospels. Acts is much like a gospel. Number 4. John covers other events not discussed in the synoptics. John knows about the other ones. He tells you that there's been others taken down to account. He writes so that you may believe. John's your eyewitness. Matthew might have been. Mark could have been to some of it. But John, he's there for the whole thing. Okay? John is telling you these things. Hey, let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about this. And he's trying to get you to see that Jesus really is God. I am. Everybody says there's 7 I ams. There's at least 9. There's twice he just says I am. You know, and so that's like the axles on the truck for John. He's getting you to see that Jesus is God. And that's big because if you know his audience is struggling with Gnosticism, which taught you have to earn your way to God. And John's announcing that God became flesh and came to us. And you don't have to know a secret knowledge to know God. You just got to know Jesus, who is God. And you're not trying to be absorbed into him. He's bringing you to him. That's what John is trying to combat because that Gnosticism was seeping into Christianity late in his life. It's very, if you know that context, John starts jumping off the page. So when you read John, he's not going to tell you the same stories the other ones did, okay? Last one. Acts is much like a gospel, but focuses on the Holy Spirit. Many scholars who are smarter than me, who have forgotten more than I know, put Acts in its own genre. But it's very much like the Gospels. I personally think, and furthermore, you should know this, who wrote Acts? Luke, who also wrote Luke, okay? Acts is Luke part 2. It's the continuation. He picks right up where he left off. I don't really think he's changing genres. I just think he's announcing a continued movement of Yahweh, a continued victory of war, a continued success. It's the Holy Spirit. It's the church. You follow what I'm saying? That Jesus is still with us in the form of the Holy Spirit. Now, you could get one of these guys that's got 3 letters after his name who come up here and tell you why I'm a fool. But for everyday intensive purposes of studying the Scripture, it's good to remember that Acts works a lot like a gospel. Okay? So our next genre, we'll get through the other 2 New Testament genres and we'll take a break. I'm getting some of those glazed looks. I understand. I went to seminary. So, yeah, the mind can only absorb what the rear end can endure. Let's keep going. Epistles, all right? Epistles are letters. The big one thing I want you to remember about, now epistles are the ones, it is so important for you to think author, audience, date, purpose and occasion. It is so important for you to think that on epistles, okay? Because that's a letter. That is a straight, this person wrote to these people about this at this time, wanting them to do this. And then you understand the book, okay? And think like a letter. They aren't meant for you to read one verse and walk away taking that however you want it to mean that to you that day, okay? You've got to get them in context. One preacher talked about a lady coming to him and she was just tired of her husband. No real reason, but just saying she wanted to leave her husband. And that morning her devotional had, what you do, go and do quickly. And that's Jesus talking to Judas at the, okay? And she said, well, that meant I can go do this. No, a text cannot mean what it never meant before. And if you make it mean what it never meant before, you will apply it in a way that it's not supposed to be applied. You see? So this context on these epistles, it comes back to it. Instead of just reading one verse, read the letter like it was supposed to be read. Epistles were heard, not sit down and read. You would come together and they would be read to you. Very few people could read. So these people were hearing these all at once. But the big thing, and I've got them listed there for you, is to remember the parts of an epistle. Okay? So that's your next blanks. Number 1, and in fact, let's do it this way. Turn to, let me think one that's just really plain. Go to Philippians. Philippians is so plain to see. All right. When you get to Philippians, I tell you what, let's do this way. Let me swap it up just a little bit. I want from here over to do Philippians. I want from here over to the aisle there to go to Colossians. And just to show some differences, let's put y'all in Galatians, okay? Now, these are all Pauline. What does Pauline mean? Paul wrote it. You need to understand when you read theological works that most of what a theologian does is sit in a room and think up big words so that he sounds smart, okay? There's no reason to say hypostatic union. Just say that Jesus was God in the flesh, okay? You know what I'm saying? God and man. Anyway, no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, we come up with a lot of big words like Pauline. So anyway, Philippians. Let's look at the order of an epistle. So let's go over here to our Philippians, folks. Who has, let's see, Brother Stanley, right? Would you read just the first basic part? I'll tell you when to stop. Read to the word Jesus, okay, if you're using the right Bible. But read to the word Jesus in Philippians 1:1. Okay, Paul and Timothy, servants of Christ Jesus. All right, and then we got Colossians right here. Who will read Colossians 1 till hey, you got to go a little bit further than that. Go to the word brother in this one. Will you read real loud?
Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus, by the will of God, and Timothy, our brother.
Okay, you notice some similarities? The first thing it tells you is author. So let's get Galatians 1:1, the brother author out of that. There. The first thing, these letters have parts to them just like your letters do. They're just different order than what we're used to. Where do you put an author in a modern letter? That's dumb. Think about it. The last thing and everything that you just heard, that was from so-and-so. You know? It's real weird if you read a letter talking about I love you, can't wait to see you, and you're thinking it's from your wife and find out it's your mom. Okay? I mean, you know, the first thing they tell you is who it's from, right up front. Paul, an apostle, Timothy, whoever, that's who it's from, okay? So that's the first thing they're going to tell you. Now let's keep going. Back in Philippians 1:1. Who wants to pick up over here in the next part of that verse? Okay, read real loud. The net we got right after, starting after Christ in Philippians. Read.
To all the saints in Christ Jesus who are in Philippi,
With overseers and deacons.
including the overseers and deacons.
Yeah, okay. So the first word of that's the most important for our purposes right now. We get author, and then it says to. Okay? So let's go here. Who's going to read the next part in Colossians for me? Read it real loud. Okay, and then Galatians.
Not from man nor through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brothers who are with him, to the churches
To the churches
of Galatia.
in Galatia. And we went in Galatians there. Paul said, I'm not just writing one myself. We are all addressing you as a church, Galatian church. But anyway, and then it says to those in Galatia. The next element is audience. So your first blank down here is author. Your second one is audience. That's your parts. The first thing I'm going to tell you is author and audience, okay? Which is real handy because you find out right off the bat, oh, he's not talking to me. I don't have to read this. So anyway, next part, going on in Philippians 1:1. This is where you're really going to see some cool, I think you start seeing something cool that's different from what we have today. It's verse 2 in Philippians over here. Read real loud, verse 2. Grace and peace to you from God. All right. Colossians, verse 2, to the saints and faithful brothers in Christ Jesus. What's next? Grace to you and peace from God our Father. And Galatians. It's called a health wish. All right. And it is like putting sincerely, which is really cool. If you ever study how they put wax, it means without wax in Latin. In other words, there's nothing fake about this. They used to use wax to fill in imperfections in statues, and if it's without wax, it's completely perfect. So that's why we use sincerely, okay, at the end of a letter. Anyway, sorry, side note, just random fact I learned last week, literally. Anyway, but that's like that random thing, this health wish. Grace is a very similar word to the Greek word for health. Paul is making a cheesy play on words. Most people identify with Peter. Bless you if you do. Unfortunately, identify with Paul. I am a cheesy, know-it-all smart aleck, okay, who really loves Jesus and wants to see him glorified. And that's Paul for you, okay? Grace, Paul would love Christian T-shirts. Paul would be the dude wearing the Reese's cup that says Jesus, Okay, he does that play on words all the time. I'm not telling you to go out and buy one of those. But anyway, so grace to you and peace, that is a health wish. If, in fact, I believe it's Peter, you see he says something about good health, or you are in good condition rather than grace. He's going more, I think it's Peter, don't tell me the gospel, but one of them does, and you can see more of a traditional way of doing it there. Okay, so a health wish is the next part. Now here's where we're fixing to get tricky, and a reason I picked Galatians. Next thing that's said, if you look at Philippians in verse 3, and I'll guide y'all through this part. Philippians verse 3, 1-3, it says, I thank my God. Colossians verse 3, we always thank God. You go back to Galatians and you don't find that thankful part. You give a health wish, and then in a really formal letter, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute too. In a really formal letter, you give a thanksgiving. I am thankful that you, whatever. I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful to God for you. I am thankful that you say something about being thankful. And sometimes it's in different ways. We are grateful. Ephesians, it's kind of hard to identify. People put it different ways. He said, blessed be the God. He's thanking God. There's something there to that element, okay? 1 Timothy is another one. If a letter is not really formal, if it's informal, you leave this part out. Why? It is expensive to write a letter. And if you are writing a quick note to people who know you, you skip formalities. You don't spend the money to write John so-and-so to so-and-so, and then do, a health wish and a thanksgiving. Health wish you almost always see, but you start reading 1 John's letters, there's a to and from, and then it's real informal. Even the ending. Why? He knows his audience real well, they know him real well, and they don't have to be formal. Does that make sense? So when you read those, you're not going to see sometimes you don't see all of these elements come up. Galatians, if Brother Asa keeps reading, which is a formal letter, from one group to another group, it skips the thanksgiving. Why? Because Paul is hacked off to no end at them. They have started exchanging the true gospel of grace and faith for a gospel of works. He goes straight from grace and peace to you. I am astonished at how quickly you have left the gospel which delivered you. He is jumping down their throat. That stands out. It is a way of saying a lot by saying nothing at all. So when you see those parts in this letter out of order, or you see them missing, why? Why gives you a lot of the tone of the letter. John's letter to his beloved, this informal, this close-knit, you get it. Paul's stern tone here, Romans is real formal because he may not have ever met these people. Formal versus informal, that changes the meaning of things. If I tell you that a letter from a friend who was in the hospital was written to you and you had mowed their yard while they were in the hospital, and they wrote a letter saying, I'm in debt to you. What do they mean? Thanks. You say the same thing, but except this time the letter's from your bank. Now it literally talking about some money, So that one's probably going to say you're in debt to us, but anyway, you're with me there. So that tone that we get those clues from the parts, that's so important. Now, after the thanksgiving, you get the body. That's the main part of the letter, okay? Then you get, at the very end, you're going to get where the author lists who sent the letter. Phoebe, she takes the letter of the Romans, and she's the one who's charged with making sure it's understood and those with her. And she's the one delivering the letter, and Paul commends her to the Romans. And then Tychicus takes some letters. I love Tychicus. He's very little known, but his hands, his fingerprints, quite literally were on most of the New Testament because took the original documents across, Asia. So he's a really cool guy. They're going to tell you who's delivering the letter, and then they're going to sign it. They're going to write like the last sentence or two in their own handwriting. Now, you got to understand that back then, when you wanted to write a letter, you went and you hired a scribe. And if you really couldn't afford a good scribe, you went and got the guy who wrote the receipts at the market, because he's the cheapest one. You can't afford the guy that does calligraphy. And you get him to write a letter for you, because you're writing on papyrus and you really got to be trained for that. But the last few lines, the untrained hand grabs the pen and writes it themselves. And it's going to look funny. So go to the very end of Galatians. I know they're already there. Turn back a few pages if you're at Philippians. Galatians 6:11, Paul starts writing and he makes fun of himself for a second. I think this is so funny, and I know that God has a sense of humor. He made the platypus and he made me. Here's one of those places, like even in the thing of the Bible, I think we see a little bit of that irony, humor come out. This stern, I'm astonished at how quickly you've left this, and Paul has to end it in 6:11. See with what large letters I am writing to you with my own hand. He's making fun of his handwriting. He's writing like a first grader. He's got to, Paul, he's got the pencil grip like this. He doesn't. It's not his trade. So it's looking weird, but that's authenticating to them that Paul wrote this part. So you see, you don't always see where they say, now I'm writing with my own hand, but that's how the letter would end. And this is one of those places where the author even mentions, I'm writing with my own hand. Those are the parts to an epistle. Formal versus informal matters a lot. You're going to see all of these in a more formal one. In a less formal letter, you see less of these. Make sense? All right, last one. This is the fun one where everybody wakes up and then we'll take a break. Hebrews, very unique book. It's like a letter, but it's not. It's a written down sermon. And that's all I'm going to tell you about Hebrews. Who wrote Hebrews? That's the one where they said only God knows. Okay? So, context that we're given in Hebrews is that this is a congregation who's failing to go forward. And so that's important to get there. If you don't get that, you start thinking this is a book about don't fall back. But Hebrews is a written down sermon. Last one in the New Testament before we take a break, apocalyptic. That apocalypsis, that's our Greek word we translate as revelation. So apocalyptic. Apocalyptic, and this is on your second page, apocalyptic relies on imagery. Old Testament imagery and modern contextual imagery. The apocalyptic literature, Revelation is your New Testament, but also the second half of Daniel, which is also weird because it's written in Aramaic, and some portions of the prophets. There's a little section in the Gospels. It's called the Olivet Discourse. Some people try to say it's apocalyptic, and it does have apocalyptic imagery in it, but I wouldn't call that section apocalyptic so much. But apocalyptic, Revelation, second half of Daniel, sometimes when you're in the prophets. That's what you need to be thinking. Revelation 1 through 6 is one place. We see a scroll described in Revelation 5, 1 through 6, and it's in the right hand of the one on the throne, and it's written within and on back. There's so much imagery that meant something to them there that a lot of us just keep right on going. First of all, the scroll's in the hand of power of the one on the throne. Who's on the throne? God. How do you know that that's God's throne? Because chapter 4 told you it was. But anyway, he's sitting there and this scroll is written within and on the back. Well, what he's just told you is it's a legal document. It's a decree. You wanted the government to save money. It's hard to write on one side of a scroll because you make it out of grass and the veins in the grass are on one side and you really got to know what you're doing to write on that side. But you can save a lot of money if you don't have to buy more paper. You didn't just run down to Dunder Mifflin and buy a ream of paper, okay? You absolutely had to hire somebody to make you an entire scroll. Make sense? And to make that scroll costs money. So when you're making this scroll, you're paying this guy's hourly wage. If you can write on front and back, you've just 2 for 1, buy one, get one free with your scroll. You wanted the government to do that because everybody wants their government to save money. So when it's written within and on the back, he's saying that this is a scroll that is a legal document. It's a decree in the hand of power of God, and it's sealed with 7 seals. Well, we'll say it this way, when a bill became a law in their day, you one day said this bill is going to be a law, and you set a day that it would become law. Then you would seal it with wax seals. And on the day the law took effect, you broke the seals. So the next verse in that passage goes, who can open the scroll and break its seals? who's worthy to carry out God's decree? All of creation stepped back going, not me. John begins to weep because he thinks he's cursed, and then one is announced who is worthy. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David. Now he's went from modern imagery to Old Testament imagery. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the warrior that would come, the root of David. Israel, God's people, are depicted twice in the Old Testament as being cut off like a dead stump. And out of that stump comes a vine that is alive. Jesus is that vine. He's the one that would provide a remnant when God's people failed. He's the one that would bring life to the dead. He's hope. You see that? That's your Old Testament imagery. This is the one who will come. And then he puts him as a lamb, standing as though he had been slain. It drives me crazy that we are so church today that doesn't blow us away. Just think of what he just said. A lamb standing as though it had been slain. Zombie lamb? You with me? But that's crucifixion imagery. That's substitutionary atonement imagery. And if you know your Greek, he's standing on the throne. Wait, I thought God was on the throne. He just put the one that died who is alive on the throne. The one who died but is alive is God. 2 in 1, 3 in 1, 1 in 3. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. All that's loaded into this 5 and 6 verses if you know the imagery. That's why everybody wants to take Revelation and turn it into this craziness. Because most of them are getting their imagery from their newspaper instead of the first century. You with me? Study what they would have understood. We don't always know all of it, but once you start to get that, man, it pops off the page and you start realizing this Revelation book is not answering when, it's answering who and why. When we read through the book going when, we're missing that the who is Jesus and the why is the salvation of man for the glory of God. The destruction and eternal defeat of evil. And we miss the big points of the book. You see that? All right. So that's my just running through it. I'm passionate about that part. And I'll let y'all come up and fill that. What I do want you to do is skip to number 2 and let's talk about numbers just a minute in Revelation and Apocalyptic. People try to go completely nuts when they look at numbers in Revelation. And y'all, numbers do mean something, but they're not these mystical, okay, oh, my child was born on July 7th, 1977. They are a promised one. No, okay? They are, numbers mean something, but don't try to over-mystify these numbers, all right? For one instance of that is in chapter 21, verses 16 and 17. The dimensions of the New Jerusalem are described. And if you look at a New American Standard and an English Standard, one of them puts it in modern measurements, and the other one keeps the original language. One of them tries to be real literal, and one of them tries to keep the original language with the original numbers that were used in those measurements. Why? Well, what you start noticing, your next blank, the numbers are multiples of 12. 12, 10, 7, 3, they all symbolize the complete people of God. That's B there. So it's numbers that symbolize completeness. They're simple stuff. And if you change it, they're actually still, if you put it in modern measurements, it's still a multiple of 12, which is really cool. But you're losing that Old Testament, our old world ancient imagery of it's all these easily seen to be multiples of 12. And it's the complete, perfect, square, whole kingdom there that's going on. Number 3, why do ESV and NSB different on translation of this passage? That's what I just told you. One's just trying to be more connecting to that modern audience, and the other one's trying to get that, trying to show you that old school idea and preserve the genre. Okay, you're tired. I'm tired. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break. Take 10 minutes, okay? Is that all right? Take 10 minutes, go use the restroom, get you some water. I saw cookies out there. There's cookies. That's always good. It's better than listening to me. Get cookies, take about 10 minutes, and come back in 10 minutes, and we'll keep going. We're going to go into our Old Testament part. I'm going to fly through this Old Testament part. I'm kind of behind schedule. Y'all are listening really slow, so anyway, I gotta push us on through it because I really want to get to the more spiritual element of how do we see Jesus in the Bible, specifically in that Old Testament part, without inventing things that aren't there. I wanted to get to that big time. So with the Old Testament part, we're going to go real quickly, starting with the law. Now, there are 3 parts to the Old Testament: law, writings, and prophets. But there are more genres than parts, okay? So there are more, in those writings, there's more than one genre. And we're not even really hitting all of those. We're just getting a gist of the Old Testament, how to study it right now, at least how to approach the genres. When it comes to law, that is our first 5 books, okay? Does anybody know the other name? This is your first blank, also known as, there's 2 other names for those 5 books. Torah. Torah is the Hebrew word for law, and it's one of them, and the other one is Pentateuch. 5 writings, that's right. Pentateuch. So law and Pentateuch, okay? That's your other names for it. So law exists in 3 types. This is so extremely, I can't put enough, adjectives, adverbs, whatever on there to get how important it is to understand this part. Modifiers, that was the word I was looking for, to understand this part. That there are 3 different types of law, and if you get this, it answers so many questions. This ends up being very practical to our modern culture. First type of law, 2 exists in 3 types. 2A, ceremonial. Ceremonial law used to create holiness in daily life and religious practice. Ceremonial law are those laws that are like put tassels on the corners of your garments. The laws, we read them and we go, why are they there? And why, mind you, if we say we follow the Bible, why are you, probably most of you, wearing a blended fabric shirt? You sinner, because the Old Testament says you are not to wear blended fabrics. Why? Because that was a way some other religions worshipped, by blending fabrics. And so you want to show, if you're in that, you got to think, coming out of Egypt culture and all those ites are in the land, if you want to show that you're not part of those, you got to be different, okay? Why can't we eat pig? Because I don't know about you, but I love me some barbecue. I grew up close to Memphis. Dry rub's a great thing, all right? And I'm glad I can eat that, okay? I'm glad I can, but why couldn't they? Because that was part of Canaanite worship. And so we got to show that we aren't part of that. It's set apartness. Ceremonial law, we don't follow to the letter today, okay? But we still follow the principle, because remember what Jesus said about the law. Not one jot nor tittle of the law will pass away. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will not pass away. So we can't drop any of it. So some of it, even though it is fulfilled, we still follow the principle behind it. What is the principle behind ceremonial law? Holiness, set apartness. We as Christians today are still called to live holy, set apart, pure lives. Are we not? So we still follow the principle of those laws, even if not the letter. Does that make sense? Ceremonial's 1. Civil laws. That's exactly like it sounds like it is. Laws of judicial nature. If an ox gores a man, then you do this. Those ox laws are really cool too, and you need to understand how bold those were, because all laws up to that point have only given rights to men. You read the ox laws in Deuteronomy, and it's if a man is gored by an ox, this. But then it goes on and says if a woman is gored by an ox. Not just that, but if a slave is gored by an ox. Not just that, but if a child is gored by an ox. And it talks about all those penalties. There's a principle behind that law. We don't have ox laws today, okay? Most places, we don't. But we do have laws that recognize, and we want even more that recognize that all life is principle behind those laws. Do you see that? Everything that's breathing is covered by that. In that, all life is precious. So we still have that principle today that we live by. So same thing with civil and ceremonial. Even though we may not, in our church bylaws go, now just in case an ox gores a guy, we don't do that, but we do recognize that life is precious. You see that? So those type things, ceremonial and civil laws, even though we don't necessarily use them to the letter, we follow them in principle. Is that yes, no, clear? Okay. Moral law is your third one. We follow moral law to the letter. Do not kill. Do not steal. Love God. Don't have idols. Those things we follow to the letter. Okay? Now, sexual practice is moral law. Food is not. And we look at those and we go, how in the world are we supposed to know? And sometimes it is hard to know. But the New Testament differentiates. Over and over and over, Jesus and Paul talk about porneia, which is your Greek word. That's the one word that sums up all of the Old Testament law. So when somebody tells you that Jesus or Paul never said these things, yeah, they did. They referenced every one of the sexual laws in the Old Testament when they used that word porneia. And then they use multiple words for that, okay? Those are moral laws. Well, dietary laws, what we eat, weren't. They were ceremonial. Well, how can you see the difference? I can see the difference because in Mark chapter 7, it explicitly says that Jesus declared all foods clean. Everybody wants to use Acts when Peter has his vision and says, don't call unclean what God has made clean. That's symbolism for Gentiles being clean. So you can use it, but you can get argued against. In Mark 7, he declares all foods clean. That's a direct quote. Praise the Lord, we can have barbecue, okay? Love Jesus. He has bacon. So that's, I'm going to put that on a shirt one day. Anyway, so that's a ceremonial law. So here's why that's important. All right, in our fight for not just traditional marriage, I hate that term, for biblical marriage, okay? When we talk about is it a sin or not, now I ain't even talking about laws and politics. Don't hear me talking about politics. I'm talking about being biblical right now. Biblically, one man, one woman, in our fight for that, and somebody will bring up why does the same chapter that says, that homosexuality is a sin also say don't eat shrimp, don't eat crawfish, don't eat anything that has a shell. I don't know about y'all, but I like a good crawfish boil too, okay? So why is it we want to fight for one of those and then, have a crawfish boil while we're doing it? Why? Because one is a ceremonial law that has been fulfilled. Not passed away, just like Jesus said, but fulfilled. The other is a moral law that is to the letter, literally true for all people, all places, and all times. Does that make sense? Now, when you read the Old Testament, sometimes you're going to go, is that moral or civil? And it's hard to tell. It is, okay? But most of the time you can, especially if you read how the New Testament treats it, you can tell, is this ceremonial, civil, or moral? Okay? So, like Sabbath law, we see Jesus, he's not breaking them, he's following the principle of Sabbath. So, anyway, all right. That's the main gist of law. We follow principles. This is number 3. We follow principles of ceremonial and civil law, but literally follow moral laws. And again, just to stress it there on number 4, no law has ceased to exist, but some have been fulfilled. And I give you the Mark verse there where the food's declared clean. All right, let's talk about poetry. Poetry. Psalms are the best examples, but it also occurs in the prophets. Okay? Prophets love to use poetry. Key characteristic is repeating the same idea multiple times. Now, what does repetition in poetry look like? You read Psalm 51. Let me just go to it. Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. He said the same thing twice. Poetry is not always rhyming. Sometimes, in a more creative form of poetry, which was used then, is can you say the same thing 2 different ways and both of them be beautiful? I love you, my dear. I cherish you like the sun, my beloved. I said the same thing 2 ways. That's poetry. That's what a lot of it is, just repeating the same idea. So your first one there is restatement. Restatement repeats the same thought with other words. You see that a lot. Say the same thing multiple ways. Rhyming, which we use now, is a low form of poetry, but it's our most popular. Contrast. That's your second one. Contrast ideas to make the same thought. Psalm 52, verse 7 is an example. I tried to put them close together so you didn't have to flip around a lot here. See the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and sought refuge in his own destruction. He didn't trust this. He did trust this. And that's not a great example, but again, my goal there was you not having to flip through a bunch of pages, just something close together. Contrast will say one thing and then say something, it'll say it positively and then it'll say it negatively. And I'm trying to think of a way to say that right now. It's kind of hard to do. I love you, my dear. I do not hate you. You see? That's it. I said it positively. This is what I do. And then I said, because I do that, I don't do this. I love you. I don't hate you. That's poetry. That's contrast. I know it's simple, but you'll see it as you read Psalms now if you remember that. Addition. That's your third one. Addition adds a result or reason to the thought. 51 verse 14. Deliver me from blood guiltiness, O God of my salvation, and my tongue will sing aloud of your righteousness. So it's kind of addition, sometimes it's cause and effect. Deliver me, and this will happen. He didn't restate the same thing. This time he said, what will happen, because of that, I love you, my dear, therefore I will be with you the rest of my life. Still poetry, but it's addition instead of restatement. Pretty simple, right? Okay. Big thing to remember on poetry of any kind is almost never literal. Roses are red, violets are blue. Sugar is sweet, but not you. I always tell this even in Revelation with the imagery, we try to take things this literal. Be careful, okay? Especially in Revelation. You read Revelation 1 and try to take it literally, you got Jesus looking like one weird dude. Okay? All that is imagery. White hair that shows eternality, eyes that are flames of fire that shows he's all-knowing, feet that show he'll conquer his enemy, a long robe showing that he's all-powerful. All that's there, okay? And it does mean what it means, but don't try to make things that aren't literal, okay? I always tell people one day some archaeologist is going to dig up a love letter and it's going to say something about sweetie, honey bun, something like that, and he's going to go, why in the world would he tell her that she makes him fat and gives him diabetes? Pickup lines have always been that way. Solomon's, your hair is like a flock of goats running down the side of a mountain. Try that one on Jackie tonight, Matt. See how it works for you. Those are the two that I always try to get people to see. Poetry doesn't always mean things literally, but it does mean what it means. You follow what I'm saying? And it's usually very clear what it means, even if it isn't literal. So remember that when you read Psalms, that type literature. So next page, wisdom literature. These are writings about everyday life. They're writings about God's design for life. Key characteristic is witty statements. They say things in a punchy, smart kind of way. You've all read Proverbs before. Benjamin Franklin, not a Christian, could have wrote Proverbs, not the book Proverbs in the Bible, but wrote things that we would consider Proverbs, early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. That kind of thing. That's what a proverb is. Say that again. Every tub sits on its own bottom. There you go. So there's all kind of. I love Proverbs. Sometimes they can be funny. Sometimes they can just be, man, that's really deep. It just comes off a lot of ways. Okay, so all right. So there's 4 Old Testament books that we consider to be wisdom literature. In the Hebrew Bible, and this is number 2, 4 Old Testament books, they are placed next to one another in the Hebrew Bible. It's not the same order in the English Bible. And I think this is very important that we see that the Hebrew Bible, the one Jesus looked at, had these books in a different order, and I think they're in a different order for a reason. Here's how they were together. Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, and then Song of Solomon. That's your next 4 blanks, and we'll go at them one at a time, okay? But that's wisdom literature. They state things in a neat way, and they're focusing on making you better, okay? Here's what they're not, and I don't have a blank for this, But I want to stress this. I was given a book once, and it was just like 2 or 3 proverbs for the day and a thought. But the title of the book, and it was only proverbs, the title of the book was God's Promise Book. Proverbs are not promises. They are rules of thumb. Is this making sense? That's why they're in a different order in the Hebrew Bible. Because you got Proverbs that talk about the righteous prospering and the wicked being conquered. Well, normally, yeah. Okay? Proverbs talks about train up a child in the way he will go, should go, and when he's older, he'll not depart from it. We all know somebody that had a good raising and went slap crazy later. Okay? Usually, you train up somebody right. That's what Proverbs is saying. It ain't saying this is how it is all the time. It's saying this is how life normally goes. And it's followed in the Hebrew Bible by Job. Proverbs is a book about how life normally goes. Job is a book about what happens when life goes crazy. Job is a book about when life doesn't go like it normally goes. Because in that book we see the righteous suffer and wicked prosper for a little while. And we see God restore. Through all of it, you constantly see God restoring, okay? But that's why those books are in that order. One's about how life normally goes, and one's when life doesn't go normally. Then you have Ecclesiastes. The best way I know to tell you Ecclesiastes is a book about what not to do. Some of the historical books, Judges is very much a historical book about what not to do. 3 or 4 times in those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's a historical book. It's not wisdom literature. We're not even going to get really into historical a lot because it takes a while. Brother Asa can teach you that. But anyway, but they repeat things like that. Anyway, back in wisdom literature, Ecclesiastes spends the whole book telling you what not to do. Now, you take Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. Job says it. Ecclesiastes ends with it. Proverbs says it over and over and over and over and over. The point of these, the be-all, end-all of wisdom, or the way to get wisdom in all these books, and it's the last thing Ecclesiastes says. He tells you for the whole book, don't do this, it ain't worth it, and the last thing he says, don't do any of that, do this. And Proverbs says it over and over and over. Fear of the Lord. The end of the matter is this, fear of the Lord. That's what they're pushing you to. Fear God, and other stuff starts to fall into place. Okay? When life's going like it's supposed to go, fear God. When life falls apart, fear God. When you've looked everywhere else and can't find it, fear God. Song of Solomon is a whole different booger. Okay? Song of Solomon is a whole different type of wisdom. The best way I know to talk about Song of Solomon is it is a book about growing old in love without love growing old. And I don't know why. I should have had a footnote on that. I meant to have a footnote. That's a quote by Archie England, who's a professor at the seminary. I think it's even in one of his books that he's written. So that's not original to me. I don't know why. I thought I put the footnote on there. But anyway, so it's recorded now. Anyway, that's what that book's about. I know that you may have been taught and raised to read that book as a picture of Christ in the church. That's weird. Okay? It just is. Don't. Okay? Does the book point to Jesus? Yeah, it points to the fact that God has a design for life, and sometimes we mess up in it, but God is constantly redeeming. You see a picture of a God that redeems people in that book, okay? So don't think I'm not saying it's totally void of that, but it's a practical book about growing old in love without love growing old, okay? Okay? We're not talking anymore about Song of Songs, okay? If you do read that book, one little tidbit I'll give you is notice the flora and fauna imagery. It's poetry. It uses a lot of poetry and prose in that book. And I'll use a lot of flora, fauna, animal and plant imagery to get things across. So key in on that when you read it. Last thing on wisdom literature. In the New Testament, James is sometimes classified as wisdom literature. It's not. It's a letter. But James is hit the point and move on. And so it just comes off almost as sayings at times. And so sometimes he's called the Proverbs of the New Testament. It's real practical. All wisdom literature is going to be really practical. And so that's one reason James gets that. All right, let's go to prophetic literature. This is the one, prophetic literature and apocalyptic literature. Let me say this about those two. Everybody has their own homemade ice cream recipe. Everybody has their own way to fry chicken. Their own recipe for a fish fry. Everybody has their own sweet tea. And everybody thinks their own is the best. That's prophetic and apocalyptic literature, okay? Everybody usually has their own little tweak to the version, even though we agree on the gist, and everybody thinks it's their best. That's why everybody gets so passionate about these. You know, well, I think it's this, and I think it's this. Let's just step back and let it be what it is and see the point about God in the book, okay? But going on with prophetic literature, you need to remember, number one, it forthtells much more than it foretells. In other words, most of prophecy is saying, this is what's happening right now. And we try to make it about something that's in the future. An example, and we'll see this example again in a minute. Isaiah 7:14 is said to King Ahaz. Isaiah 7:14 is where it says, unto you a sign will be given, a child will be born, a virgin will bear a child. Okay? That's Isaiah saying that to King Ahaz. He's saying that about 730 years before Matthew uses it. B, the immediate fulfillment of this is written about in Isaiah 7 and 8. In other words, the immediate, that's a poor way of wording that. I need to go back and edit that. The immediate fulfillment of that you see in chapter 8. Now, all right, this is a part where if you don't hang with me through the whole thing, you'll think I'm a heretic, okay? But you hang with me through this and you'll be smarter for it. You do not defend the virgin birth of Christ using Isaiah and Matthew's words, because the word virgin does not mean in those languages what the word virgin means in our language. It can mean young maid, it can mean the prophetess, which is what it means in Isaiah 7, okay? You defend the virgin birth of Mary with Luke, where Mary says the phrase, I've never known a man. That means, that's blatant. You follow what I'm saying? Matthew means virgin like we're thinking virgin. I'm not telling you he doesn't. What I am telling you is that somebody who knows their stuff can say, well, he's not necessarily saved. You follow me? Luke, there's no wiggle room. Luke, that nails it down. It was a virgin birth. Okay? So, but in Isaiah, 730 years before Jesus comes, and he says this, and then in 7 and 8, Isaiah says, and I went into the prophetess, and he and his wife have a child. They have a few kids, and their name makes a whole sentence. I can't remember the sentence off the top of my head. But he describes what will happen when this child is born if Ahaz responds correctly. Go to number or C, 1C. Isaiah is discussing how to respond to invading armies with Ahaz. Not future events, still 730 years away. It would do Ahaz absolutely no good. For 730 years from now, over half a millennium after you're dead, you'll get a sign about what you need to do now. You follow me? The immediate fulfillment of that happened right there with Isaiah. And he said, Ahaz, when this child is born, that's going to be a sign to you that if you do what God's told you to do, and what God told him to do was do nothing, that God's going to be with you. The unstated reciprocal of this, the Emmanuel part, if you respond to this child the way that God has told you to, God will be with you for blessing. The reciprocal is, God's going to be with you if you don't respond the way you're supposed to, but He'll be with you for cursing. You see that? Either way, God will be with us. That's the idea going on there with Ahaz. You say, well, how can Matthew use that? We're going to get to that in just a minute in the next section, okay? Because Matthew's doing something really cool with that, and I'll show it to you in our next section. But just hang with me right now, and do you see what I'm saying? When these prophets said these things, people then and there understood what was going on. Sometimes it was talking about a long time from now after us, but most of the time it was talking about what was going on right then and there. Y'all with me? So don't try to turn everything crazy with that. Number 2 on prophetic literature. Often uses imagery, poetry, that's your blank, and prophetic drama to make a point. When I say prophetic drama, I mean Isaiah laying on his side for 3 years or 3 months? You're supposed to know these things. You're a doctor. Well, no, I was kidding. He's smarter than me, he really is. He lays on his side. He has to preach naked for a long time. Let's hope God never calls anyone to do that again. He has to act out things. I'm talking about Jeremiah hiding his belt and finding it rotten, or is that Ezekiel? I think it's Ezekiel. Those times when the prophets act out things. Y'all with me? That's prophetic to make a point. It's street theater, but it made a prophetic point. Okay. I am not going to write now. It's not on your handout. I have my own little note here that I'll leave up here for you to look at if you want to. It is rules of thumb, but it's a little graph that tells the difference in prophecy and apocalyptic. I'll leave it up here on our next break if you want to take a look and see what's the difference in apocalyptic, talking about the future, and prophecy, okay? So I'll lay that up here, and y'all can come look at it. I'm not going to go into that right now for time's sake. Let's take one more break. Let's make this one a little bit shorter. My voice is giving out right now, so I need to take one more. I know we just took one. But the next section I want to do all at once, and I don't want to try to cover it all right now. So let's take one 5-minute break and come back in 5 minutes. So you know kind of where I'm coming from. I absolutely love doing this, but it's not what I'm used to. As Asa told you, I'm used to speaking at youth and college camps, and where you give them that context and illustrate it and apply it, and you can be that guy who tells a funny joke, and you're just got everybody glued. And then you come in and you teach a seminary lecture, and it's, I'm not used to that. I know these aren't the most interesting, engaging things you're ever going to hear. But the goal of this, the goal of this is not this tearful altar call tonight. The goal of this is 6 weeks from now, you're sitting, having your morning quiet time, knowing what you're doing, and having that moment, you're feeding yourself, okay? When we first moved to New Orleans, my wife and I wanted to celebrate that by going to Emerald's. And that was we wanted to celebrate her getting her first job by going to Emerald's. That was an awesome meal. The turnip greens were sweet. How do you make turnip greens sweet? It was great. I had a pork chop that I took pictures of. Okay, I'm ashamed of that, but it was awesome. The people that were waiting on us, there were 5 people. It was great. But you can't live on just Emeralds, okay? And sometimes we try to make it conference to conference, big speaker to big speaker, conference sermon to conference sermon, or we try to live Sunday to Sunday, and that pastor's writing new sermons every week, so maybe that's not conference level, but that's at least Applebee's and Ryan's, okay? And we're trying to do that. We're trying to do that once a week and do that, and we're going home and never feeding ourselves. You know what I had for supper? Not for lunch. I had leftovers for lunch. But you know what I had for supper the next night after we went to Emerald's? I had ramen noodles. And Emerald didn't cook them. I did, okay? Because eventually, you got to feed yourself. And while ramen noodles may not have anything on Emerald's, it's still nourishment. And the goal of this is for you to be able to go home and feed yourself a little bit better, okay? To maybe even whet your appetite till you pour into this and you really get deep into it, because we are doing the 30,000-foot flyover on this stuff, all right? Just to intro you to the idea of systematically studying the Scripture for exegesis and context. The next part I want to get a little bit spiritual with you on, though, a little more spiritual. I'm skipping the historical books of the Old Testament. Historical is probably the plainest, most relatable, even though they're the oldest, and that it's history, and we see God move through it. But I'll leave that aside for now. I want to go into something, though, that I think gets overlooked in putting Jesus places where He's not in the Old Testament, and then you have this overreaction to people turning Jesus into something He's not in the Old Testament, to guys that can't even see Jesus in the Old Testament. I've loved some of the men that I've worked with, and men that have fruit in their lives. I'm not saying these men aren't Christian, but there's some of them I look at and I just go, why aren't you just Jewish? Because you just can't see Jesus in the Old Testament, and He's there. But let's not make Him something He's not, okay? What I mean by let's not make Him something He's not is He is not a red scarf in Rahab's story, okay? But Jesus is very plain in that story. And you'll see that in a minute, okay? Don't put Him under a rock where He ain't, okay? So how do we see Jesus in the Old Testament, okay? How do we see that? Because Jesus says it's all about Him, and that's where we start on A up here. Luke 24, 44 and 45. You can read that on your own later. All of the Bible is about Jesus, okay? As one Shai Linne, the rapper, said, every road in the Bible leads to Golgotha, okay? It all points to the cross. It all points to Jesus. It's all about Jesus. Old Testament, Jesus Christ concealed. New Testament, Jesus Christ revealed. And when we get our minds around, when we're reading Genesis, it's pointing to Jesus, we start to see big things. But when we start inventing things that aren't there, we become lunatics. Not just lunatics, lunatics. We're so far off base, we're cartoons at that point, okay? We have to let it say what it says and not try to invent things. And then when we see it say what it actually says, it's beautiful. So, the three portions to the Old Testament. I didn't even finish that top part. All of the Bible's about Jesus. Moses, Psalms, and prophets refer to the three parts of the Hebrew Old Testament. And then number one, the three portions of the Old Testament are the law, the writings, and the prophets that we talked about just a moment ago. Now, I'm going to move on a little bit quickly because we've already talked about that, and you can fill that in a minute if you need to look at this. Number two, Jesus shows the disciples that every part of the Old Testament points to Him. Not that every verse points to Him. That's tricky, and I got to be careful how I adjust this. All of it's about Jesus, okay? But we may not always, and I don't know how to see Him in all of it. I know that all of it's about Him, okay? But once we get the principle of not just one verse, but the passage that the verse is in, we can start seeing Jesus in it, okay? Even with the law, and we're going to see that. So don't try to take just one line and say, well, that's about Jesus. Well, it's going to point to Jesus when we get it in its passage, the passage will. Let's keep going and see if we can see what I mean by that. 2a, okay? To see Jesus, we must see what a passage says about the character of God. Like a diamond, some reason B's going, I need to go back and edit that too. Like a diamond, all of God's character comes to a point at the cross. Now that is A.W. Tozer's thought. My footnotes are gone for some reason. Tozer talked about the attributes of God being like a diamond, the characteristics of God being like a diamond. A diamond has a lot of sides, but all those sides come to one point. God's wrath and God's mercy are both revealed at the cross. Wrath poured out on sin, but mercy to sinners by a Savior. God's love and His justice. Sin punished in justice, but love that would provide a Savior. Revealed at the same point. Two seemingly contradictory attributes that bring things to the same point. Love and mercy. Justice and grace. Wrath and forgiveness. All being revealed in this one point. This ultimate revelation of who God is and what God has done for man at the cross where Jesus pays for the sins of man and the resurrection that shows that the sacrifice was accepted. What am I saying? In the Old Testament, when you read a story, a law, something, you may not see love and mercy. But if you see wrath, the greatest display of wrath man has yet seen is the cross. If you see love, well, what's the ultimate display of love that we've seen? The cross. If you see justice, what is the greatest display of justice that we've seen? The cross. So in the Old Testament, what does the Bible teach us about God? We have been taught to read the Bible by Sunday school literature and pop culture for years, asking, what does the Bible say about me? The hardest thing for me as a Christian to get my mind around was the Bible's not about me. Because I've been taught to read it and say, now what does that mean to you? How does that apply to you? Okay, but it means what it means, all right? The Bible's about God. He is the protagonist of the whole thing. He's the star, not us. Even in the books where He's never mentioned, by name at least, Ruth, Esther, you don't hear His name, but you see Him move. You see that? Restoring and moving a plan along. It all eventually, I mean, you see Ruth. If you don't see God going toward the cross in Ruth, something's wrong with you. I mean, it's setting up the plan. It's what's coming, okay? And that's why you read it with Judges. It's at the time period of the Judges when everything's going wrong and nobody's doing what right. And you read Judges and you go, why in the world would God, where's God? What is God doing while His people were doing all this? Ruth is what tells us God was moving the storyline along toward the cross. Because that's the lineage of Jesus. You see that? It's smack dab there after this dark point, but God was moving even when man couldn't see. He's there, and I'm preaching now. I need to quit preaching and start teaching again. Diamond, all of it. Y'all. If you and I know you have a pastor who is fired up about Jesus, but if you're a pastor and you don't get fired up when you start talking about the Bible pointing to Jesus, something's wrong, because that's what we're in this for. Okay, so. Anyway, you see the diamond illustration from Tozer. Last one there on 2D. Once we see what a passage reveals about God, then we can see how the passage points to Jesus and His work at the cross. Because all of God's character is revealed at the cross. What does it say about God? Okay, that will be revealed at the cross too. Plain and simple. So let's break it down. Jesus in the law. How do we see Jesus in the law? A few ways. To see Jesus in the law, one must see the character of God in the law. Tithe laws, sewage laws, and this is 1A, B1A. Tithe laws, sewage laws, and others like them show that God provides everything His people need to be the people they are supposed to be. Did you know there are laws? There are sewage laws about how to dispose of human waste in the Old Testament. How in the world do those laws point to God? Well, one, those laws are in place for holiness, cleanliness type holiness. Holiness is displayed at the cross. God is set apart from sin. My God, why have you forsaken me? You know, so that's there. Not only that, that law's existence shows God's nature is to provide for His people. If God doesn't give them that, they die of pestilence traveling through the wilderness for 40 years. But He's taught them a safe way to dispose of sewage. He gives them everything they need to deal and be the people that they are supposed to be. Well, what is God's greatest provision for us to be the people we're supposed to be? The cross, Jesus Christ. That's right. Y'all see that? That's not too far of a leap. That's God's character. You can get even more symbolic with it without going too far. God gives sewage laws. God deals with the dirtiest, nastiest parts of them. What's the greatest example of God dealing with the dirtiest, nastiest parts of us? The cross, Jesus. Y'all see that? All right, so we can see that. Sewage laws, we can see that in tithe laws. The tithe is their economic system. That is their tax. There's all kinds of tithes, okay? If God doesn't give them that, they have no economic system. They are not a nation then, and they are not the people they were created to be. God always provides for His people to be who they are supposed to be, and His greatest provision for His people to be who they're supposed to be is Jesus Christ. You see? I'm not saying I see it, and every time I read something, but we see God's character in the law. That the very fact that God provides the law is a provision. Now, the law itself shows us that we're sinners, and there's a practical part of that. That's what Paul talks about in Romans 7, all over it. But Jesus in it, there's your general, it's provision, and that points to God. That points to His character, which is revealed at the cross. All right, B1B, under the law, the ultimate example of God's provision for His people is the cross. Or you can write Jesus, however you want to word that. B2, Jesus is more easily observed in the religious festivals prescribed in the law. A, the first one we're going to look at is Yom Kippur. Spelled Yom, Y-O-M, Kippur, K-I-P-P-U-R, Kippur. Yom Kippur is translated Day of Atonement. It's one of the festivals they had. This is the festival where you hear about the high priest going into the Holy of Holies, sprinkling blood on the Shekinah mercy seat of God. And sometimes you hear about the rope around his ankle, and that was probably true, but the bells and all that we don't really read about that until way later on in Hebrew history, but the rope's there anyway. So he goes into the Holy of Holies in case he sins and dies, and he sprinkles blood on the mercy seat. There's 2 goats. There's other sacrifices all the way through it. I'm just giving you the gist of it. 2 goats are brought. One is called the expiation goat. And let me see, I've got blanks for that. Expiation is your second dash. So I've already mentioned it, so we'll treat it first and come back to that first one. The expiation goat was released and represented the removal of sin. The removal of guilt, the removal of sin. That goat would be sent into the wilderness for Azazel. Brother Asa would love to explain to you what that means later. I'm just kidding. That's one of the most weird things in the Old Testament. We really don't. It's hard to understand. But he's sent out there. Interesting fact about that goat is later on the goat kept coming back to the camp, which Israel thought that meant the sins weren't removed. So they're not supposed to sacrifice this goat, but if they just keep walking at it and make it run off a cliff, they didn't kill it. So that's what they did later on. They would release it into the wilderness, but then walk in a line until it killed itself so that it wouldn't come back to the camp returning the sin. It's a symbol that sin would be removed, okay? Your first blank is the propitiation. So your second blank's expiation. The first one is the propitiation goat. It was sacrificed and represented a substitute. Places his right hand on the head of the goat and sacrifice it by cutting its throat, and have to look at it in the eyes as the life is drained to remember that sin requires the shedding of blood. It's gross, but sin's gross. It requires death to pay the penalty. This goat didn't pay their penalties. Read Isaiah 1, read Psalm 51, read Hebrews. The blood of goats and bulls could never atone for the sins of man. These are symbols that one day atonement would be made. A substitute would come. You got me? How were they justified in the Old Testament? Paul tells us they were justified the same way we are. Abraham, Genesis 15, 5 and 6, Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him as righteousness. They were justified by faith alone. Okay? Those things pointed to the fact that one day a Savior would come. Okay? So, this goat shows that wrath has to be poured out on sin. And we don't like thinking about that, but y'all, you don't want a God that doesn't punish sin. You do not. You can't call God perfect if He doesn't punish sin. We said, well, He's forgiving. Yeah, but we want Him to forgive the 4-letter word we said when we stubbed our toe on the coffee table, but we don't want Him to forgive the child molester. He's forgiving in a way, yes, but He will punish sin. Sin can't go unpunished, or God's not just. All sin, from the 4-letter word to the child molester, has to be punished, or He's not just. That means He swept something under the rug. And we can't have a perfect God if He's not just. So how is He going to punish sin? Well, here's what Jesus does at the cross according to Paul. He who knew no sin was made to be sin. Expiation. Sin is removed from the sinner, and Jesus becomes that sin. The academic term there is forensic transfer. Don't know why we picked that, but that's what we picked. Forensic transfer of sin to Jesus. He takes your sin. Your sin is expiated. It is removed from you. Then at the cross, He who knew no sin was made to be sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. He bears the punishment. That's where your wrath, justice, all that. He takes the punishment for sin. Now sin is punished, and the sinner doesn't have sin, so he doesn't have to have punishment, but he's still got a problem. He's still not good enough to see the Father. You say, well, what do you mean good enough? He hadn't done anything wrong. Angels ain't done anything wrong, but none of them run take the scroll in Revelation because they're not good enough. 9 and 10-year-old baseball team can be undefeated. They can't play the Atlanta Braves. You got me? Maybe this year's Braves, but y'all follow what I'm saying to you? There's still an idea of good enough. So what does Paul say? Not only do we get propitiation at the cross and our sins are paid for, and expiation that our sins are taken away, but Paul says we are given the righteousness of God. That's imputation. What do you call it when you cut something off? Amputation. So when you add something to, it's imputation. It is Christ imputing His perfection to us. His good enough, if you will. So that's what happens. That's reflected in Yom Kippur, propitiation and expiation. So that Israel would be right before God. God's people will be right before God. Okay. All right. Going on, we see, and that your last blank on that, Jesus' work at the cross combines propitiation and expiation. Passover celebrated the final plague in Egypt and the release of Israel. That is B2B. The blood of a lamb would cause the destruction of God to pass over without causing harm to the inhabitants of the home which it was placed on. So you take this blood of the lamb, put it over your doorpost, and because you've applied the blood of the lamb to your doorpost, you don't experience the wrath and punishment of God. Do I really have to spell that one on out? The lamb standing as though he had been slain. That lamb, the Passover lamb. In John has Jesus die at the same time the Passover lambs are being sacrificed. Because it is Jesus' blood applied to our hearts that causes us to be dismissed from experiencing the wrath of God. But that doesn't mean the wrath of God was not poured out on our sin, because it was when Jesus died on the cross. You see all this pointing to Jesus? All these are symbols of what's going to come, and that is fulfilled in Jesus. So reading down under that, the second dash, Jesus shed blood likewise causes the wrath of God to pass over those who believe without causing harm. Final dash, Passover is the major festival emphasized in the Gospel of John. What does John the Baptist say when Jesus walks up? Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin. You hear that expiation part? That's even Yom Kippur imagery. But then the whole thing is showing him his blood spares us wrath. Passover lamb. All right. The last one down there, C, is Festival of First Fruits. Edmonds got a lot of names. I call it first fruits. There's lots of different things it gets called. The first of the harvest is offered to God as a grain offering, as a prayer that the rest of the harvest would be blessed and go as the first of the harvest has went. Dash 1 under that, Paul shows Jesus is the fulfillment of first fruits in 1 Corinthians 15. He talks about Jesus' resurrection being the first fruits of the resurrection. In other words, He's the first of the resurrected. Those who are in Him, just as with the first fruits harvest, as the first of the harvest has went, so will the rest go. As the first of the resurrection, Jesus went, accepted unto God, so will the rest of us go. His resurrection reflected there in the festivals. Does that make sense? He goes as that offering. Okay? So, last dash under C there, Paul shows that first fruits reflect the resurrection. So we've seen the character of God in the law, and we've seen the representation of Jesus in the festival system described by the law. Next thing we need to see is explicit prophecy. This is your number 3, B3. Explicit prophecy of a coming Messiah is given in passages like Genesis 3:15. These are in your more narrative parts. But Genesis 3:15 is known as the proto-evangelium. Again, we invent big words to feel like we're smart. Proto meaning first, evangelium. There's that word again, announcement. It's the first announcement. It's the one where he'll bruise his heel, but he'll crush the head of the serpent. I love that. I mean, God just starts right out the gate talking smack. I love it. And if you don't think God talks smack, you just read Job. Job 41. I want to name a praise band, Bridal Dragon, because of Job 41. He talks about Leviathan. Leviathan was this ancient world. He's supposed to be the god, little g god of the sea, or we might even call him the king of the sea, and it's supposed to be this sea serpent that just, sea monster is what it is. I mean, men are terrified of it, and he looks at Job and he says, what can you do to Leviathan? I draw him from the deep with my pinky, bridle his heads, and let my daughters play with him. I'm just like, that's awesome. I mean, because God talking smack about this sea monster. So I think a good praise band name would be Bridal Dragon because of that. But anyway, because you'd sound like an 80s hair band and come out singing Lord Lift Your Name on High. But it'd just be great. So anyway, that back down to reality here. Genesis 3:15 is explicit prophecy that a Messiah would come. Isaiah 53, well, that's prophecy, but y'all follow what I'm saying. There are explicit statements that a Messiah is coming. Okay, Jesus in the writings and the prophets. Typology. We fail to teach this, and we as teachers one day, I'm afraid we'll be accountable for that. And we do it on this name of it's complicated. People can't understand that. And it always drives me crazy when people tell me, youth can't go that deep. Some of them kids taking calculus. Don't tell me they can't understand typology, okay? Have you been to school lately? These kids can go deep. We're just scared to take them there. Truth be told, half the time it's because we don't want to go deep in our own study enough to teach them in theirs. The Hebrew word for teaching is just an intensive form of the word for learning. And that's, I think, the problem a lot of times. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. I didn't mean to get on it. Typology. What does that mean in the writings and the prophets? When the New Testament reveals that Jesus is a deeper fulfillment of a prophecy fulfilled in the Old Testament. That's a mouthful. In other words, something is foretold in the Old Testament and fulfilled, like we were talking about in Isaiah a while ago, but then in the New Testament we see a deeper fulfillment. One example is given you here. My favorite example is Psalm 22. Okay? Number 2, the writings reveal that Jesus typologically fulfills characters like David. 2a, the religious leaders would have claimed that Jesus could not have been the Messiah because humiliation at the cross proved he was not like King David. That's a big thing for them. You're not the Messiah. You're not like David. This Messiah, he's going to be even greater than David, and you're dying on a cross. B, from the cross, Jesus quotes Psalm 22:1, showing that he is more than David. I quoted this a while ago, and it gets taken out of context. He means what he's saying. God is not turning his back on him so much as we say, as pouring out wrath on him, okay? And that next time you hear somebody say turning their back, don't run up and go, ooh, you're wrong. No, you're a jerk. What's going on there? Get the point, okay? God's pouring out wrath is what's going on. Psalm 22:1 is, anybody know Psalm 22:1? I bet you do. Yeah, my God, what have you forsaken me? Some scholars think that what Matthew and Luke and Mark are telling us is that Jesus quoted the whole chapter. John alludes to that. John 19, he's got Jesus saying, I thirst. And in Psalm 22:14, he starts talking about how his bones are dried up. His mouth sticks to his jaws. He's thirsty. He starts talking about in Psalm 22 how his heart is melted like wax within his breast. What happens in John when they come stab Jesus in the side? Blood and, let's say, blood and water, that's your English reading. The water part in Greek is hydros, and you're right. I'm sorry, I'm a New Testament guy, and I always have to go on this tangent. The word there is hydros, hemokihydros, blood, and hydro. They would look at Sprite, glycerin, and water and call them all hydros, okay? We always translate it water, but what's happened is Jesus has had low blood pressure. He's nailed through the wrist, y'all. He's been beaten with a cat of nine tails, got a crown of thorns beaten into his face. He's got low blood pressure. Your heart compensates for that by putting pericardial fluid around it, okay? You put extreme stress on the body in that situation, and the heart collapses on itself and breaks open. It's a heart attack. Blood and clear fluid mix, and as it sits, it coagulates. They come by, stab Jesus in the side, and it looks like his heart melts out of his chest like wax. Psalm 22, my heart is like wax, it's melted within my breast. He quoted Psalm 22 to who? The religious leaders who know the Old Testament word for word. One historian said that if you drove a nail through the Torah that a Pharisee had learned from, he could tell you every word it hit. When I tell you they know it word for word, I mean it quite literally, word for word, the whole thing. So when he quotes the title of a song in their psalm book, they start playing through it. And then they see him, I thirst. He's setting this up. Blood melting like wax out of his chest. And you say, well, how in the world? You know, that's kind of reaching. You keep reading in that passage, and he starts talking about them casting lots for his garments. And then he says, They have pierced my hands and feet. That's half a millennium before crucifixion's even invented. And the word he uses, kairi, if you read it, you may see somewhere it says like a lion. That's a King James translation, and that's fine. And most King James don't even say that now. They've been updated. And that was in the 1700s. Your 1611s where you go back to that. Anyway, that's because the word kairi can mean like a lion, or it can mean pierced hands and feet. The reason we're pretty certain to go with pierced hands and feet isn't just because of the cross. It's because when the Hebrew Old Testament was translated into Greek, couple hundred years before Jesus, those guys chose to translate it pierced hands and feet, and they knew the language better than any scholar today ever will, okay? So that's the defense of that. That book's called the Septuagint, if you've ever heard of it. That one goes with that, and that's when we take it. Anyway, going on in Psalm 22, pierced hands and feet, bedding on my garments, Jesus has quoted this to religious leaders who know that chapter, who are sitting there going, you're not like him. Who wrote Psalm 22? David, in a time when he was very much suffering. But David's writing poetically about himself. Remember, that's not necessarily literal. Jesus is going, not only am I like David, I'm more real than David was. You see that? I mean, that's just, and they're going, he calls on Elijah, let's just shut up and see what happens. He cries for help to declare victory there. I love that. That's typology. That is, this Old Testament thing happens, and then Jesus is this deeper, even more real. The best way of saying it is he's the truer and better. You know, follow that? That's from the writings, okay? So let's look at that thing in Matthew a little bit. We talked about it a little bit ago. I want to finish that for you. Why can Matthew reference that unto you a child is born thing when it was for Ahaz 730-something years before? Number 3, Jesus is also typologically foretold in the prophets. Oh, and by the way, the last blank on 2C is king. Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of the king of God's people. 3, Jesus is also typologically foretold in the prophets. So we see the writings, one example of typology there. Typologically in prophecy, Isaiah 7:14, that's where it is said to King Ahaz about 730 years before Matthew 1:23 uses it. So, let me read Matthew 1:23 to you real quick. And these are just examples. These are, you see these, and I hope you start seeing them other places. You see how it works as you read the Old Testament and New Testament now. Matthew 1:23, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. Well, that's back for Ahaz. How is Matthew telling us that prophecy that was for Ahaz is now being fulfilled in Jesus? Typologically is how. 3b, the immediate fulfillment of this is written about in Isaiah 7 and 8. C, Isaiah 8:18 says there is more to the story than what Isaiah can know. This is one of the few places where this immediate fulfillment has happened, and Isaiah says, me and my family, me and my kids are signs and portents. In other words, this is for now and this is real, but he's going, there's more to this. You know, and I don't mean he's looking down through knowing exactly what it is, but he's going, there's more to this. And Matthew's going, I found the more to it. I found the more to it. Here is the more to it. Matthew, D here, 3D. Matthew gives the same challenge to his audience as Isaiah gave to Ahaz. God will be with you, but how you respond to this child will determine whether God is with you for blessing or for cursing. That's what Ahaz got. Your sign is the birth of this child, Ahaz, and how you respond. Matthew looks at us and everyone who would ever read his book and say the birth of Jesus is the sign that the Messiah has come, and how we respond to Jesus will determine how God is with us. That's typology. You see that? It's fulfilled in the Old Testament, but Jesus is the truer and better Emmanuel. And the child in the Old Testament was named Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz. I can't remember what that means, but I love saying that name. All right, last thing. Matthew has shown Jesus to be the typological fulfillment of Isaiah 7. As we were I've thought of so many things that why didn't I say that? Why didn't I say this? Why didn't I add this as I went through this? I love when churches let me do this. But I want to show you one more thing. Let's just go ahead and do it instead of taking one more break. Maybe and be able to go over this a little later. Talk after it. What tools do you use? I'm telling you to ask author, audience, all that kind of stuff. Where do you get that? How in the world? Because Tonight I have spouted off so much stuff off the top of my head, and it's stuff I've written about and studied about. You know, I'm supposed to know that. But how are you supposed to find it when you ain't studied it, when you hadn't been to seminary? How's your quiet time supposed to be informed this way? Well, the last thing I've listed, and note there's not blanks. This is just information. And if you want to write notes about what these things are, you do that. But I just want to tell you the tools you use and what they're going to tell you. The first tool, the primary tool, I would say, other than the Scripture itself, the primary tool is a good study Bible. Now, there's basically two types of study Bibles. There's committee written and there's individual written. Individual is Ryrie, Schofield, MacArthur. You follow me? Those are okay. They're fine tools. But you're getting the viewpoint of one dude. Okay? And that's okay, especially when they're smart guys. But it's just one guy. The other type is a committee written. That would be like your ESV study Bible or your NASB study Bible. There's a bunch of guys working on this, and it's not just one guy doing the stuff, okay? It's checked out by multiple folks. I like those. But my personal favorite study Bible is the ESV study Bible. And everybody goes, somebody a while ago asked me, why, what do you use? I use ESV. And then people go, why do you use ESV instead of NASB or whatever? I'll tell you why. Because the day I went to buy my Bible, ESV was $3 cheaper than the NASB. Okay, that's why. So anyway, all that stuff, don't worry so much about that stuff. But anyway, I like that study Bible. It's got great stuff. But here's the information. Most people open a study Bible and they're never shown how to use the thing, okay? A study Bible is going to give you a few types of information. It's going to have the text in one spot. It's going to have footnotes. While you're reading the text, it's going to give you a 1 or a B or something, and at the bottom there's little footnotes. You're probably going to get that in your everyday Bible you buy off the shelf. That's stuff that's absolutely essential. They need, if somebody digs this up a million years from now and we're down to a few copies, whatever, that this is the stuff you got to know. But then the study Bible starts adding other things like a cross-reference section. And you'll have another little marker. It may be a symbol, a letter, a number, whatever. It may be italicized to show you that it doesn't go to a footnote, but it'll go over to a cross-reference. Matthew 27:46. My God, why have you forsaken me? It's going to have a little marker. And over on that marker, I'm going to look at it and it's going to say Psalm 22:1. And then it's going to list the places in the New Testament other than Matthew 27:46 that's quoted. So you go back, but you don't just read the verse it's quoted in. If you just read Psalm 22:1, you miss 14 through 18 that I dealt with. And you sure miss 19 through the end where the psalm becomes a victory psalm and ends with David going, I'll make this known to a generation not yet born. Well, that's you in the typological fulfillment of things. That's cool. So you read the whole thing, get the context of the Old Testament part, because the context of the Old Testament reference can be applied to the New Testament readers. Those cross-references are so important. That's why it's so important to remember that in Hebrews, he's comparing his audience to the generation that wandered around in the wilderness and never got to go in. They didn't lose their salvation, they lost their opportunity. Okay? You get that, you see huge things there. Anyway, that's how cross-references work. There's going to be maps in these Bibles, and they can be lots of different places. They may have a map section, okay, I don't know. But at the bottom, off to the side, somewhere on that page, brief commentary, like verse-by-verse commentary. You get to Revelation 3, and it starts talking about Laodicea that we were talking about earlier. At the bottom of the page on that study Bible, it's going to give you a real quick gist about their water system, their eye salve center, their tapestry industry, and where it was located in relation to the other churches. Real quick breakdown, but it's going to give you one point of view. So that's basic things you can get from a study Bible. Okay, that's the basic parts, the text, the cross-reference, and the commentary. The commentary in a study Bible is very basic. It's one, even in a committee-written study Bible, it's going to give you one point of view. Now, that's why it's our most basic tool. When you pick up a good evangelical study Bible, the point of view they're coming from is a like-minded point of view. And you're going to get that point of view, and that's going to be good. But there are other points of view. So, when we need to go deeper than that, we go to a commentary. That's C on this page. A commentary may have a great evangelical author, and he's going to give you that point of view that the study Bible gives you. But he's also going to give you the liberal point of view. He's going to give you a, not so widely held point of view. He's going to tell you what everybody, the big arguments on this passage. And if it's a good commentary writer, he's going to tell you why he thinks what he thinks. Y'all got me? Now, how do I know what commentary to use? I've got a website down on the bottom. It disappeared. Goodness. That's it. But I had it down, yeah. Right out beside commentary, write bestcommentaries.com. Now, when you go to bestcommentaries.com, it'll say Old Testament books, New Testament books. You'll click on the testament you're looking for, then you'll click on the book you're wanting a commentary for, and it will rank them 1 through however many they are. But the best part of it's not just the ranking. Out to the side, it's going to put a little letter, P, T, or D, or S. S's are rare, okay? S's are like specialized. Like my thesis would be an S. It's only on Mark 13 and only on certain aspects of it. It's real specialized, okay? The T is technical. You're a seminary guy, you're a professor, you're doing research. P is pastoral. It's on a level of a seminary grad, somebody who has, can work with Greek and Hebrew, on their own. They know how to handle it, but written in a way that you can form a sermon, not a dissertation out of. Okay? D is what most people need to look for. It's devotional. And it's going to give you, a good one's going to give you all those point of views, but it's written on a layman level usually. Sometimes that D, though, doesn't give you all the point of views, and it really just ought to be called a devotional. But if you get on bestcommentaries.com and you're finding the first 1 or 2 that have a D by it, that's good for your average, you're not average church person, but a church person who's serious about knowing more about the Bible. Makes sense? So, all right, so that's a commentary. It just goes, it's going to give you author, audience, all that stuff. Oh, and here's the big deal. I forgot the main part of telling you about commentary and study Bible. On a study Bible, I've told you about the page when you're looking at the text. But when you get to the first page of a book, Matthew, before it starts giving you the Bible, the actual text, it's going to have a one point of view. Some of them will list the other views, but it's going to give you the main argument they believe about author, audience, purpose, occasion, geography. It will outline the book, give you major themes. It'll tell you literary devices to look out for, that stuff we didn't even get to, purpose, occasion, all of that. That's where you get that info. Okay? So that's what they're so good about. And a commentary is going to do that at the beginning of the commentary. But it's almost as thick as a book instead of just a quick introduction. Here's the main thought. He's going to talk about all of them, same way he does with the text. Makes sense? Study Bible is your basic tool. Commentaries when you want to go deeper. Between those is a Bible dictionary. That's not what it sounds like. A lot of times we think that's to look up words. Bible dictionaries are for topics. When you are reading and you come across Corban, which is mentioned in Mark 7, and the concept's mentioned in Matthew 15, even though the word isn't used, and you're going, what in the world is Corban? Well, a good commentary is going to tell you what Corban is, and a good study Bible is going to tell you what Corban is, but if you really just want to know Corban, you go to a Bible dictionary and you look up Corban. And some Bible dictionaries, like the IVP Bible dictionaries, they're so big that they have dictionaries that are just for the Gospels, just for those 4 books, and it's that thick. I mean, it's a 10-book set, just takes up a whole shelf, just anything you can think of. And you turn to Corban in that part on the Gospels, and it's a 4 or 5-page article telling you about where Corban come from, what it was, when it ended, everything you ever wanted to know about Corban. And Corban, just in case you're curious, was a law about donating things to the temple and the synagogue, and they started teaching that it was better to donate things to them instead of help parents that may be sick or even the needy with it. And that's why Jesus blasts it there. But anyway, you read all about that in a dictionary, even deeper than you can in the commentary or a study Bible. Bible Atlas. That's where you go for geography. Hey, you don't need to go buy the brand new, latest edition, most expensive thing out there. Reader's Digest has a Bible Atlas that is adequate. Okay? Bible atlases are great for geography, and a lot of them will give you that topography, geology. So you come across and you all of a sudden you hit Revelation 2 and 3 and these 7 churches are listed and you want to know where they're at. Not only is it probably going to talk about Asia Minor, but there's probably a section in that Bible Atlas that's on those 7 churches and in their relation, and it's going to tell you that they were on a postal route. And the way they occur in Revelation is in the order that it would have been on the post route. Give you way more information than you ever wanted to know. Okay? That's a Bible atlas. That's where you can go even deeper to find that kind of stuff, okay? Lifeway sells these. I'm a Lifeway employee. I feel very important to tell you that. I'll also tell you I got Amazon Prime. So, Strong's Concordance. Y'all, Strong's Concordance makes Greek and Hebrew adequately accessible to a 7th grader, okay? Some of you brought your Strongs, and I want to walk you through. If you have one and you want to do this, most people think a concordance is a book you take, and I'm going to steal yours if you don't mind, all right? And there's another one. I've got one of those too, the older editions. The newer ones kind of look like this. Most people think these books exist for you to go, a verse about the sparrow falling from the tree. Let me go find the word sparrow, and okay, that's the verse I was looking for, and they close it. That's not what it's for. Let's think of a good word. First in Mark 13:10. God guard my motives. But anyway, first in Mark 13:10. The gospel must first go to all nations. What does first mean? Okay, a lot of people try to turn that into order of event. But Jesus is talking about the fall of the temple, which happened in 70 A.D., okay? And he's saying all this, the gospel must first. And that's a weird tangent to go on because he's been talking about if you suffer and you're going to be brought before councils. And not you. He's talking to the disciples, telling them what they're going to experience. He's saying, y'all are going to do this, y'all are going to do this. But the gospel must first go to all nations. That'd be a real weird thing to interject if he's talking about order of events. However, if first means level of importance, it just changed, and he's going right along with it. You guys are going to be subjected to all these things, but it is of utmost importance that the gospel go to all nations. You follow what I'm saying? But we see that word first in Mark 13:10, and we go, I wonder, what does first mean? Because first can mean order of importance, or it can mean who won the race, or it can mean, order of event. What does it mean? And so we come into this thing here, this concordance, and we go to F, and we find the word first. Okay, if I can, where am I at? Ease. I did. I need to go to the eye doctors where I need to go. Woo! Flash, fire. Okay, so I got fire. I go down here, and I find first. Okay, and then I go across from first, and there's every place in the Bible the word first is used. And then I go down and it says, okay, it is used in Mark 13:10. And then right across from Mark 13:10, it's got a number. And I go look up that number in the back. It'll be H or G or O or N, and then a number. That's Old Testament or New Testament, Hebrew or Greek, okay? And I go in the back and I look up that number. All right, find my number. G whatever. Proto. Proton, prote, protasis. What? That's the word. That's where we get our word proto, first, a prototype, a first type. Same thing, okay? And then it tells me every possible meaning for that word. Level of importance, order of event, all of those. And I can go, okay, so the word, and it writes it in Greek and English. So you don't have to sit there going, that's a Greek word. I have no idea what it is. Oh, there it is in English. Protos, or proton, whichever one. Make sense, y'all? And it gives you every word it can possibly mean. Then you look at the Bible and you go to your context and go, what does that probably mean in that context? Well, he's talking about what they're going to face, so it's probably talking about level of importance there. Make sense? And when your preacher stands up on Sunday morning and he says the Greek word right here, he may have used the Strong's and not just be that smart, right? Because I don't always know those words. I use the Strong's. Great tool when you want to know those words in the original language, okay? Well, let me show you something even better, though. This is the Strong's. That's the book. Let me get back to your handout to make sure I'm covering everything. Electronic sources. Go to number 2 automatically. My phone is in my bag, but there's a wonderful little app called the Strong's Concordance app. Those are truck keys. Anyway, there's a free version that has almost every word in the New Testament And I mean, it's almost every one of them. I would encourage you to do the free version. Well, nah, it's on site. In fact, I think it's off. Anyway, I don't have to hold it up. I'll tell you. When you open it, you open to the book of the Bible. So you probably already need to know the verse with this app. Where that one you can look up the verse even. Look up your verse there. Find the verse you're looking for. You need to know the word first. You're in Mark 13:10. And you go to Mark, and you go to chapter 13, and you go down to verse 10. And every word that it gives you is in blue. Well, first is in blue. So I touch first. And it opens up the Strong's page to first. And I don't have to go find a number and all that good stuff, okay? There's a free one and there's a $5 one. The $5 one has every word in the New Testament done that way, okay? So there's your Strong's. That's one of the apps. So there's Strong's. Let's talk about these electronic sources at the top, though. Bible study software, eSword. eSword comes with a free King James Bible that has a little number by every word. Click on the number. There's the Strong page, okay? It comes with Bible dictionaries. It comes with Bible thesauruses, which gives you etymology, and all of it's free. And you can buy modern stuff, anything anything that is not under copyright, so it may be a little bit dated, but it's good stuff. All right, like Strong's, free on eSword, okay? So, and you can buy even stuff. You can add books that are covered. So it's a free download. I think it's esword.com. You know what I'm talking about, Asa? I think it's esword.com. Free stuff. If you just want to spend some money, buy Logos and go take a class on how to use it. I have Logos. It's great. It'll parse every word for you. It's about $900, okay? But Logos is awesome, but it's like professional software stuff. But if you are just that cool, and if you have just that much money, your pastor would love a copy. I'll say that much, okay? So he probably already has it for that matter. It'd be great for somebody to donate Logos in addition to church computers, because you can buy the license to put it on multiple computers. And it's a great study software for your staff to have access to. So when you buy Logos, you get the entire New American Commentaries. I have something like 17 commentary sets on my computer because of Logos. Anything that's free, I mean, there's so many books. I think I have it's like 8,020-something books. It's 8,000-something books. I don't even know everything I have because it's on Logos. All right? And then you can pull up the page, and it'll go even further than Strong's, but it's expensive. All right? Bible Works and Accordance are kind of like Logos, but they don't give you all the books. They just deal with the language. I'm just letting you know it exists. You probably... If you're going to go with those, go big or go home, okay? Get Logos if you're going to buy something like that, all right? Unless you're a seminary student and just need to make it through Greek or Hebrew, then maybe Bible Works or Accordance. The apps, Blue Letter Bible. I love Blue Letter Bible. I use Blue Letter Bible in church because I can put Greek on this side and I can put any other translation I want as long as I got good service. You can download most of them, but like ESV and more modern ones, they're free, but you got to be connected to like LTE, 4G, or Wi-Fi. And I can see them side by side as my pastor's preaching through them, okay? Blue Letter's great. Most people use YouVersion. That's another one that's on here. YouVersion is all kind of free Bible study apps. They even got some free commentaries you can get from YouVersion. The Strong's Concordance one. The ESV Bible app is great because it's free, for one, and you can highlight the verse just like you could in your regular Bible and make a note about it, and it'll save that note. And you can even write a journal entry if you want to do that, and bookmark pages. And ESV apps, I mean, they spend a lot of time and money to give something away with it. So it's another good one. Websites, BibleGateway.com. You can get free commentaries. Matthew Henry's on there. Matthew Henry ain't the greatest commentary ever, but it's pretty reliable. It's old, but you get different commentaries are available. Just about any translation of the Bible you can think of is free. There's free dictionaries, all kind of free stuff that you can get online at Bible Gateway. Bible Hub, that's the other one that's missing. There were supposed to be two more down here. Oh, I know why they're on there and not on mine. I didn't add them to the filled-in copy. That's why. Okay, so, sorry, what's the other one that's on there? Bible Hub. It's like Bible Gateway, but maybe has some more updated resources to it. I just found it last week and added it on there. That's why it's not on the filled-in copy. Somebody had showed it to me. I was like, oh, I got to add that to that seminar thing. So, 5 minutes to spare, I'm telling you. Thank y'all again. And let me take just a few minutes to see if there's any questions you want to ask real quick. Anything that I just said that you think probably everyone in the room is confused on. Again, I know this is like getting a drink of water from a fire hydrant. That's why you take this home and you reference this later. You're not supposed to walk out of here knowing everything we just talked about. This sheet will help you get started. Those sheets should help you guide knowing what you're doing. Okay? Any questions? Y'all just ready to go. I know taught night classes. I know the look that I'm getting right now. It's not the pastoral look. It's the professor look. So anyway, all right. Thank y'all so much. Thank you so much. Brother AC, take them back over.